The hunting grounds of Kepler, 442b, were supposed to be perfect. That's what the brochure said, anyway. Premium hunting experience, they called it. Exotic prey species, challenging terrain, guaranteed trophies. What they didn't mention was that one of those exotic prey species was going to turn their entire hunting party into a collective nervous breakdown. Captain Thanevex adjusted his optical camouflage for the third time in 10 minutes, watching the shimmer of light bend around his chitinous frame. His species, the Corvani, had been apex predators on 17 different worlds. Their natural cloaking ability, combined with advanced technology, made them nearly invisible to most life forms. Nearly. Status report. He hissed through his mandibles, addressing the 5 other hunters scattered through the dense jungle canopy. Sector 7 clear, came the reply from Hunter Brixnell. No sign of the target. Sector 12, negative contact, reported Hunter Zimward. Thanevex's compound eyes twitched with irritation. They've been tracking this single human for 6 hours now. 6 hours. His kind could usually corner and eliminate a target within 30 minutes. But this particular specimen, this Marcus Kane, was proving to be something else entirely. The human had been part of a crashed transport vessel. Standard protocol called for the elimination of witnesses to their hunting preserve operations. Should have been simple. Walk in, eliminate the survivors, harvest a few trophies, call a day. But Marcus Kane had other ideas. Sir, came a nervous voice through the comm system. It was Jack Tor, the youngest of their hunting party. I think he's watching us. Thanevex's head snapped toward the coordinates. Impossible. Our cloaking technology is military grade. Nothing should be able to detect us. But even as he said it, a chill ran down his exoskeleton. There had been moments, brief instances where he'd felt exposed, vulnerable, like something was studying him with the same intensity he usually reserved for his prey. Marcus Kane, meanwhile, was having the time of his life. Well, considering he was probably going to die horribly in the next few hours, he was maintaining remarkably good spirits. The mud coating his entire body was starting to crack and flake off, but it was doing its job. These alien hunters might have fancy invisibility tech, but they apparently never learned the ancient art of reading body heat signatures. More importantly, they'd never learned to think like prey. Marcus had been a reconnaissance specialist in the Terran Defense Corps before mustering out and taking the civilian transport job. He'd spent 3 years on Proxima 7, where the local predators could smell fear from 2 kilometers away and see through most camouflage systems. The trick wasn't to out-tech them. The trick was to think like something they wanted to eat. He moved through the undergrowth with deliberate clumsiness, breaking twigs and rustling leaves just enough to create a trail. Not a human trail, but the kind of noise a large herbivore might make. Something worth hunting, but not immediately threatening. The aliens bit every time. Through the mud caked around his eyes, Marcus watched Hunter Brixnell drop from a tree branch 20 meters ahead, optical camouflage flickering as he moved. The creature was impressive, he had to admit. 2.5 meters tall, with a chitinous exoskeleton that looked like it could deflect small arms fire. 4 arms ending in razor-sharp claws. Mandibles that could probably bite through steel. Too bad it was also dumber than a box of rocks. Marcus shifted his weight, deliberately snapping a branch. Brixnell's head whipped toward the sound, and Marcus could practically see the alien's predatory instincts kicking in. The hunter began stalking forward, moving with the fluid grace of something that had never been prey in its entire evolutionary history. That was about to change. Marcus had spent the last 6 hours setting up what he privately called the Gauntlet, a series of improvised traps using nothing more than salvaged materials from the crash site and a natural environment. The aliens might have superior technology, but technology had limitations. Physics, on the other hand, was universal. Brixnell stepped directly onto the concealed pressure plate Marcus had rigged from a piece of hull plating and some local vegetation. The counterweight system activated with a satisfying thunk, and a massive log swung down from the canopy like the fist of an angry god. The impact sent Brixnell flying 15 meters through the air before he crashed into a tree with a sound like a xylophone falling downstairs. His optical camouflage flickered and died, revealing the full extent of his damaged exoskeleton. Anterbrinel, report. Fainvex's voice crackled through the comms system. The Brixnell groaned and tried to push himself upright. Ambush trap. The human, impossible. Humans don't set traps. They are prey animals. Marcus, listening in on their communications through a salvaged frequency scanner, actually laughed out loud at that. Prey animals, right? He wondered if these idiots had ever heard of persistence hunting or pack behavior or any of the 1,000 different ways humans had clawed their way to the top of the food chain on dozens of worlds. Probably not. They seemed like the type who'd read a nature documentary and think they understood an entire species. Hunter Zane Moore was having similar thoughts, though his were considerably less charitable toward humans in general. He'd been tracking what he assumed was the target for the last hour, following a clear trail of disturbed vegetation and broken branches. The human was obviously panicked, fleeing through the jungle without any attempt at stealth, which should have been his first warning sign that Zane Moore dropped from his perch in the canopy, landing silently behind what he was certain was his quarry. The figure was crouched behind a fallen log, breathing heavily. Perfect. He raised his plasma rifle, savoring the moment of triumph. Into the hunt, human. The figure turned, and Zane Moore found himself staring at his own reflection in a piece of polished metal propped up against a pile of leaves and debris. Oh shit, he had just enough time to say before the real Marcus Kane dropped out of the tree directly above him. Marcus had salvaged a piece of hull plating sharp enough to shave with, and he put it to good use. Zane Moore's optical camouflage system was apparently located in a cluster of electronics mounted on his back, and Marcus went for it with surgical precision. Sparks flew as the system overloaded, and suddenly Zane Moore was very, very visible, and very, very angry. You little mammalian pest. Zane Moore spun around, swinging one of his clawed arms in a wide arc. I'll tear you apart piece by piece. Marcus ducked under the swing and rolled behind the fallen log. You know what your problem is? He called out, pulling a makeshift smoke grenade from his belt. You think like predators. He triggered the device and thick, acrid smoke began pouring out. It was a mixture of burning electronics and some local plant matter that produced particularly dense clouds. Predators are used to having every advantage, Marcus continued, his voice seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere as he moved through the smoke. Superior strengthening, superior senses, superior weapons. But you know what predators aren't used to? Zane Moore spun wildly, trying to track the human's position. His thermal sensors were useless with all the burning debris, and the smoke was playing havoc with his other detection systems. Fighting prey that fights back. The first piece of debris hit Zane Moore in the back of the head. Then another. Then a whole barrage of rocks, sticks, and chunks of metal began raining down on him from multiple directions. None of them were individually dangerous, but together they were incredibly disorienting. Marcus had rigged up a series of simple catapults using bent branches and salvage materials. By triggering them in sequence, he could create the illusion of being in multiple places at once while actually remaining safely hidden. Zane Moore charged toward where he thought the human was hiding, only to crash through a carefully constructed barrier of branches and leaves. On the other side was a pit that Marcus had spent 3 hours digging and covering with debris. IT wasn't deep enough to seriously injure the alien, but it was deep enough to trap him long enough for Marcus to disappear back into the jungle. Thanevex was beginning to suspect that their intelligence reports on human capabilities might have been somewhat incomplete. All hunters, converge on my position, he commanded through the comm system. We are changing tactics. The remaining 4 members of his hunting party, including himself, met at a predetermined rally point. Jektor was visibly nervous, his optical camouflage flickering with anxiety. Hunter Morvex seemed calm but alert. Hunter Crixtor was checking and rechecking his weapon systems. Sir, Jektor said, his mandibles clicking nervously. Maybe we should call for backup. This human, he's not acting like the others we have hunted. There will be no backup, Thanevex replied coldly. We are Corvani. We are apex predators. We do not call for backup to deal with a single prey animal. But privately, he was beginning to have doubts. The human's behavior pattern was all wrong. Instead of running in panic, he was actively engaging them. Instead of trying to hide, he was setting traps. Instead of acting like prey, he was acting like a predator. The thought was so alien to Thanevex's worldview that he immediately dismissed it. Humans were prey. That was established scientific fact. They were soft, weak, poorly armed mammals with inadequate senses and no natural weapons. The idea that one could pose a genuine threat to a team of trained Corvani hunters was absurd. Marcus Kane was currently proving just how absurd it really was. He'd been monitoring their communication for the last hour, and their predictability was almost insulting. They were regrouping at exactly the location he'd expected them to regroup at. They were using the same tactical formations they'd been using all day. They were even having the same conversation about whether humans were actually dangerous that he'd heard them have 3 times already. If this was the best the galaxy had to offer in the way of apex predators, humanity was going to do just fine out here. Marcus checked his improvised arsenal one more time. Smoke grenades made from burning electronics and local flora. Flashbang devices cobbled together from power cells and reflective materials. A crossbow built from salvaged materials that could punch through most armor at close range. And, of course, his secret weapon. The thing about being covered in mud wasn't just that it mastered heat signature. It also made you smell like the local environment. And Marcus had taken the time to study what the local environment actually smelled like. Specifically, he'd found the mating pheromone glands of a creature called a rask beetle. Large, aggressive, territorial insects that the local predators usually avoided. The scent was distinctive. Marcus had coated himself with the stuff an hour ago. Now, he just had to wait for it to take effect. IT didn't take long. The first sign was the sound of buzzing. Lots and lots of buzzing. Then the screaming started. What the hell is that noise? Morvex demanded, looking around wildly. Buzzing was getting louder and closer. Sir, Jektor said, his voice rising to a panic. Sir, those are rask beetles. A whole swarm of them. We need to move. Now. But Thanevex was paralyzed by the impossibility of what was happening. Rask beetles didn't swarm. They were solitary creatures. They didn't attack in groups. They certainly didn't coordinate their attacks, unless something was driving them into a mating frenzy. The first wave of insects hit them like a living wall. Each rask beetle was the size of a dinner plate, with mandibles that could crack stone and a stinger that could punch through light armor. Individually, they were manageable. In a swarm of several hundred, the Corvani hunters' optical camouflage systems overloaded immediately as the beetles began covering every surface, attracted to the electromagnetic emissions. Suddenly, for supposedly invisible predators were very, very visible and very, very popular with the local insect population. Marcus watched from his carefully prepared observation post as the most feared hunters in 3-star systems were reduced to screaming, flailing, and running for their lives. It was, he had to admit, deeply satisfying. But the day wasn't over yet. This was only the opening act. Thanevex managed to fight his way clear of the swarm first, his exoskeleton providing better protection than his companion's lighter gear. But his optical camouflage was completely fried, and he was covered in bite marks and stinger wounds. Fall back to the ship, he commanded. Emergency extraction. Now, the remaining hunters didn't need to be told twice. They ran for the trilene like their lives depended on it, which, given the circumstances, they probably did. Marcus let them go. For now, he had bigger plans for the finale. He watched the aliens disappear into the distance. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. The thing about humans wasn't that they were apex predators. They weren't, at least not in the traditional sense. They didn't have the biggest claws, or the sharpest teeth, or the most advanced technology. What humans had was something far more dangerous. They had the ability to think like prey when they needed to, and like predators when they wanted to. They could adapt their strategies to their circumstances. They could use their environment as a weapon. They could turn their weaknesses into strengths and their enemies' strengths into weaknesses. Most importantly, they could learn from their mistakes. And Marcus Kane had learned a lot today. The real hunt was about to begin. The Corvani hunting vessel Apex Dominion sat in a clearing like a metallic cancer on the jungle floor. 300 meters of sleek, predatory design that screamed, "We kill things for fun and profit." Marcus Kane crouched in the undergrowth, studying the ship through a pair of salvage binoculars, and had to admit it was impressive. Too bad it was about to become the galaxy's most expensive funeral pyre. The surviving hunters had retreated to their ship 2 hours ago, no doubt licking their wounds and trying to figure out how a single human had turned their perfect hunt into a complete disaster. Marcus could see them through the transparent sections of the hull, moving around like angry wasps in a jar. Time to give them something to really buzz about. Captain Thanevex was not having a good day. His hunting party was down to 4 members. Their equipment was compromised, and worst of all, he was going to have to explain to his superiors how they'd been outmaneuvered by what was supposed to be a routine cleanup operation. "Status report," he growled, his mandibles clicking with barely contained rage. "Medical Bay is treating the stinger wounds," reported Hunter Morvex. "Jector has 17 puncture marks, but nothing life-threatening. Krixtor lost 2 optical sensors, but his backup systems are functional. What about our missing hunters? Brixnell is alive, but injured. Zaymore, we lost contact 6 hours ago." His beacon went dark. Thanevex's compound eyes twitched. Losing hunters was bad enough. Losing them to a single human was unthinkable. His species had built their reputation on being the ultimate predators. They hired out to wealthy clients across the galaxy, providing exclusive hunting experiences on worlds where lesser species could test themselves against dangerous prey. The irony wasn't lost on him that they'd apparently found something genuinely dangerous. "Sir," Jector approached nervously. "Perhaps we should consider orbital bombardment. Sterilize the area from a safe distance." "Absolutely not," Thanevex snapped. "We are hunters, not cowards. We finish this the proper way." But even as he said it, doubt gnawed at his confidence. The human's tactics were completely outside his experience. Everything he knew about prey behavior suggested that Marcus Kane should be cowering in a cave somewhere, not actively hunting the hunters. Marcus, meanwhile, was putting the finishing touches on what he privately called Operation Fuck Around and Find Out. The aliens might have superior technology, but they'd made a critical error in landing their ship on the jungle floor instead of keeping it in orbit. They'd given him access. The power coupling he'd been working on for the last hour was a thing of beauty. Salvaged from the transport crash, it was designed to handle massive electrical loads. With a few modifications, it could handle them very, very badly. Marcus connected the final wire and smiled. The device was now tied into the ship's external power grid through a maintenance access panel that the aliens had apparently never considered securing. One press of a button, and their fancy hunting vessel would experience what electrical engineers called a cascading system failure. What everyone else called a really big explosion. But first, he had a message to deliver. Inside the ship, Thanevex was reviewing tactical data when the main communication array crackled to life. The voice that emerged was distinctly human and distinctly amused. "Good evening, gentlemen. I hope you are enjoying your stay on our lovely planet." Every hunter in the ship froze. The human was speaking directly to them, using their own communication systems. "My name is Marcus Kane, and I have been having the most fascinating day. You see, I have learned quite a bit about your species. You call yourselves apex predators. You hunt for sport. You consider other species to be nothing more than entertainment." Thanevex's mandibles clicked furiously as he traced the signal. The transmission was coming from everywhere. The human had somehow tapped into their entire communication network. "Here's the thing, though. I've been thinking about that word. Apex. It implies you are at the top of the food chain, doesn't it? Nothing above you. Everything below you. Must be nice having that kind of confidence." The signal flickered, and suddenly the main display screen activated, showing a live feed from outside the ship. Marcus Kane stood in the clearing, visible and apparently unarmed, looking directly at the camera. "Unfortunately for you, I'm about to introduce you to a concept that your species seems to have missed. It's called food chain disruption." Marcus held up a small device in his hand. "You see this? This is what we humans call a reality check. When I press this button, Your ship's power grid is going to experience what we technical types call a very bad day. Your life support will fail. Your weapons will go offline. Your engines will shut down. Vex was already moving, barking orders to his remaining hunters. Emergency power. Disconnect from the main grid. Now, but Marcus wasn't finished. Oh, you can probably fix it. Eventually. But here's the really fun part. While you're sitting here in the dark, wondering what went wrong, I'm going to be out here, waiting, watching, and when you finally work up the courage to come outside. The transmission cut out, leaving the hunters in tense silence. Well, Vex demanded, cut the external power connections. Sir, Vex replied, his voice strained. I'm trying. The system isn't responding. It's like something is preventing us from disconnecting. That something was Marcus Kane's second surprise. While he'd been preparing the power surge device, he'd also installed a series of override protocols in their maintenance systems. Nothing fancy, just enough to lock them out of their own ship's basic functions for a few minutes. That a few minutes was all he needed. Marcus pressed the button. The explosion was magnificent. Not the ship-destroying detonation he'd originally planned, but a carefully calculated overload that took out every non-essential system while leaving life support intact. The Apex Dominion went dark, emergency lighting casting eerie shadows through the hull. More importantly, the ship's defensive systems went offline, including the automated weapons platforms that had been tracking Marcus's position. Now the real fun could begin. Inside the ship, chaos reigned. Emergency klaxons blared as systems failed one after another. The hunters stumbled through corridors lit only by emergency lighting, trying to reach manual override stations that were no longer responding. Backup power. Vex shouted over the noise. Give me backup power. Working on it, sir. Crix Tor was frantically working at a control panel, his claws clicking against the interfaces. I can restore partial power to essential systems, but it'll take time. How much time? 20 minutes. Maybe 30. 20 minutes was a lifetime in a tactical situation. 20 minutes was enough time for a resourceful human to do considerable damage to a ship full of stranded hunters. Marcus had planned for exactly this scenario. The first indication that something was wrong came when Tor, stationed at the main entrance, reported movement outside. Sir, I'm seeing something. Thermal signatures. Multiple contacts moving in a pattern around the ship. Vex moved to the sensor station, squinting at the display. The readings were confused, showing heat sources that appeared and disappeared randomly. How many? I can't tell, sir. The readings keep changing. Sometimes it looks like one contact, sometimes dozens. What they were seeing was Marcus Kane's latest innovation, thermal decoys. Simple devices made from salvaged heating elements and reflective materials, designed to confuse infrared sensors. He'd scattered them throughout the jungle around the ship, creating the illusion of a large force moving in coordinated patterns. The psychological effect was exactly what he'd hoped for. Sir, Vex called from another station. I'm picking up audio. You need to hear this. The speakers crackled to life, and the sound that emerged was unmistakably human. Voices, multiple voices, talking in low tones and tactical communications. Alpha Team, move to position 2. Bravo Team, hold at the northern approach. Charlie Team, prepare for breach. Copy that, Alpha Leader. Explosives are in position. Roger, Charlie. Initiate on my mark. Vex felt his blood run cold. It wasn't just one human. It was an entire team. A coordinated assault force that had somehow appeared out of nowhere. How many survivors had there been on that transport? How many were still out there? The answer, of course, was one. Marcus Kane was providing all the voices himself, using a simple audio recorder and some basic sound editing. He'd spent an hour recording various tactical communications, then played them back through speakers positioned around the ship. The effect was so convincing that even he almost believed there was a full assault team out there. Defensive positions. Vex commanded. Prepare for siege protocols. But before his hunters could move, the lights went out completely. Even the emergency lighting failed, plunging the ship into absolute darkness. Marcus had triggered the second phase of his power grid attack. This time, he took out everything that in the darkness. the hunters could hear new sounds. Mechanical noises, drilling, cutting, the unmistakable sound of something trying to break into their ship. They are breaching the hull. Jektor's voice was high with panic. Multiple breach points. The sound were real enough. Marcus had rigged up several devices designed to make exactly those noises. Rotary tools, impact hammers, cutting torches, all operated remotely and positioned at strategic points around the ship. The hunters couldn't see anything, couldn't coordinate their response, couldn't even tell how many attackers they were facing. They were reduced to stumbling around in the dark, jumping at shadows and their own fear. Marcus, meanwhile, was having the time of his life. He positioned himself at the ship's main airlock, using a combination of electronic lockpicks and brute force to work his way through the access systems. The aliens had never anticipated someone breaking into their ship from the outside. Their security was designed to keep prisoners in, not to keep attackers out. 20 minutes after the power went out, Marcus Kane was inside the Apex Dominion. The ship's interior was a maze of corridors and chambers designed for beings considerably larger than humans. Marcus moved through them like a ghost, his mud-covered form invisible in the darkness. He'd removed the emergency lighting power cells from several sections, ensuring that his movements remained undetected. His first stop was the weapons locker. Corvani hunters carried impressive personal arsenals: plasma rifles, neural disruptors, molecular blades, and a variety of exotic weapons designed for taking down large, dangerous prey. Marcus helped himself to a selection of the most useful items, then moved on to his next objective, the navigation computer. Marcus had no intention of letting these hunters return to their home worlds with reports of human capabilities. Better to let them think this had been an isolated incident, a fluke, a stroke of impossibly bad luck. A few keystrokes, and the ship's navigation database was corrupted beyond recovery. The star charts were scrambled, the hyperspace routes were randomized, and the communication logs were deleted. From the hunter's perspective, they were now stranded on an unknown world with no way to contact their superiors. Marcus was just getting started. His next stop was the medical bay, where he found Hunter Brixnell strapped to a treatment table, still recovering from his encounter with Marcus's improvised trebuchet. The alien was conscious but groggy, his compound eyes focusing slowly on the human figure standing over him. "Hello there," Marcus said conversationally. "Remember me?" Brixnell tried to speak, but his vocal cords were damaged. He could only make clicking sounds with his mandibles. "I just wanted you to know," Marcus continued, "that this isn't personal. Well, okay, it's a little personal. You to try to kill me. But mostly, this is educational." He pulled out one of the plasma rifles he'd liberated from the weapons locker. "You see, your species has a fundamental misunderstanding about humans. You think we are prey animals. Weak, defenseless, easy targets." Marcus powered up the weapon, and Brixnell's eyes widened in terror. "The truth is, we are not prey animals. We are not predator animals either. We are something much more dangerous. We are survivor animals. We adapt. We learn. We overcome." The plasma bolt took out the medical bay's main computer, sending sparks flying. Brixnell flinched, but Marcus was already moving on. "Think about that while you are lying here in the dark." The next part of Marcus's plan was perhaps the most important. He made his way to the ship's central command center, where he could hear the remaining hunters coordinating their response to the supposed assault. "Backup power is online." Crickstor's voice echoed through the corridors. "I can restore partial lighting to essential areas." "Do it," Thanevex commanded. "I want to see what we are dealing with." The lights flickered back on, revealing the command center in all its alien glory. Banks of computers, tactical displays, and communication equipment filled the space. And in the center of it all, sitting casually in the captain's chair, was Marcus Kane. That he was no longer covered in mud. His salvage combat gear was clean and functional. The plasma rifle across his lap was aimed directly at the room's entrance. He looked, for all the world, like he belonged there. "Good evening, gentlemen," he said politely. "I hope you don't mind if I borrow your ship for a few minutes." The four remaining hunters stood frozen in the doorway, their weapons raised but useless. Marcus had positioned himself perfectly. Any attempt to shoot him would result in catastrophic damage to the ship's control systems. How? Fainvex's voice was barely a whisper. What did you get in here? Trade secret, Marcus replied with a shrug. The real question is, what happens now? He gestured to the tactical display, which now showed the true situation outside. No assault teams, no coordinated attack, no army of humans waiting to storm the ship. Just empty jungle and the scattered thermal decoys that had fooled their sensors. You see, here's the thing about apex predators. You have never had to deal with something that fights back intelligently. Your entire hunting strategy is based on overwhelming force and technological superiority. But what happens when your prey is smarter than you are? Fainvex's mandibles clicked with rage. You are just one human, one insignificant mammal. That's right, Marcus agreed. One human, one supposedly helpless prey animal. And I have just taken your ship, neutralized your team, and demonstrated that everything you thought you knew about my species is wrong. He stood up, the plasma rifle tracking smoothly to cover all 4 aliens. Now, here's what's going to happen. You're going to pack up your little hunting expedition and leave this planet. You're going to go home and tell your friends that humans are off limits. No more hunting, no more exotic prey experiences, no more anything. And if we refuse, more Vex demanded. Marcus smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Then you're going to find out what happens when prey animals stop being prey and start being predators. He gestured to the view screen, which now showed the exterior of the ship. Dozens of improvised explosive devices were visible, attached to critical systems and structural supports. A single command from Marcus's control unit would turn the Apex Dominion into scrap metal. The choice is yours, gentlemen. You can leave voluntarily, or you can stay here permanently. Either way, the hunting stops here. Fainvex looked at his remaining hunters, saw the fear in their eyes, and felt something he'd never experienced before in his entire career as an apex predator: defeat. We'll leave, he said finally. But this isn't over. My superiors will. Your superiors will never hear about this, Marcus interrupted. Your navigation computer is fried. Your communication logs are deleted. Your star charts are corrupted. As far as the galaxy is concerned, you encountered a technical malfunction and barely escaped with your lives. He paused, letting that sink in. Of course, if you want to go back and tell them that a single human outsmarted, outfought, and outmaneuvered your entire hunting party, that's your choice. I'm sure they'll be very understanding. The silence stretched for long moments. Finally, Fainvex nodded curtly. We'll leave. Excellent choice. 2 hours later, Marcus Kane stood in the jungle clearing, watching the Apex Dominion disappear into the star-filled sky. The ship's departure was less than graceful. With their navigation systems damaged, they were essentially flying blind. But they were alive, and more importantly, they were gone. Marcus allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The crash transport's emergency beacon was still functional, and it would eventually bring rescue ships. Until then, he had supplies, shelter, and the knowledge that he'd just taught some of the galaxy's most dangerous predators a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. The thing about humans, he reflected, wasn't that they were the strongest or the fastest or the most technologically advanced. The thing about humans was that they were stubborn, adaptable, and absolutely vindictive when threatened. They might not be apex predators, but they were something potentially more dangerous. They were survivors who could learn to hunt. As Marcus walked back toward his improvised shelter, he couldn't help but smile. The galaxy was a big place, full of species that thought they understood humanity's place in the cosmic order. They were about to learn otherwise. After all, every predator was somebody else's prey. It was just a matter of finding the right hunter. And humanity, Marcus Kane was beginning to suspect, was going to be very, very good at hunting.